Hello, Shane.
Hello.
So, today, dear friends, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest, Shane Parrish. Shane, I know you're not a big fan of bios, but still, I want to introduce you to our French listeners. Shane, you're a man of mystery. Not only have you dedicated a significant portion of your career to working for a three-letter intelligence agency, but when Googling you, your name leads to a Wikipedia page about a fictional character named Shane Parrish from the Australian soap opera Home and Away. So here I was doing my research. But at the end of the day, I decided that the best way to truly understand who you are is not through Google, but tuning into your podcast, The Knowledge Project. It masterfully addresses profound philosophical inquiries while offering practical solutions on our daily lives. We also learn a lot about you personally in some of the great routine you have with your children that I am going to copy. And today, I'm witnessing your sense of adventure as you join me, a podcaster you've never met before, on a Sunday morning during your family vacation. For that, I'm deeply grateful.
Well, thanks
Thank
for
you,
having me.
So, my first question is, why did you accept this interview?
I don't know. There's a serendipity to it, right? Which is like I'm in Paris.
Yes.
You're in Paris, and the timing seemed to work out. So it just seemed like a good thing to do. And sometimes I say yes to stuff like that, and sometimes I say no. And I don't know. It just lined up.
Well, I'm very grateful for this.
Yeah.
And referring back to a point we were discussing right before we started recording, I think it's very interesting the point you made on building relationships. And I'd like to know, how do you think about building relationships in your life?
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts on this. One is I try to have every relationship in my life be a win-win.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is often we look at relationships and we make them transactional. And if we make them transactional, that's fine, but they're not going to compound.
Hmm.
And so if we think of what we know about compounding, all the benefits of compounding come at the end. And if we think of relationships, a lot of our relationships tend to be transactional. And if they're transactional, they can't compound.
Hmm.
There's no trust. You can't go fast. You have to go slow. You're always wanting something. And then you're always sort of looking over your shoulder to make sure the other person is not taking advantage of you. And if you think of any relationship we have, whether it's with kids, whether it's with your partner, your spouse, your customers, anybody, you have a relationship and there's four possible permutations. There's win-win, there's win-lose, there's lose-lose, and there's lose-win. But in every one of those relationships, there's only one that survives across time, and that's win-win.
Hmm.
But to have a win-win relationship, it can't be transactional. You can't take the last dollar on the table. You have to ensure your counterparty in that relationship is winning. And we all know what it feels like to be on the losing side of a relationship,
Yeah.
right? Where we feel, our boss is beating us over the head with a newspaper to get us to work harder. Where we feel like we're being taken advantage of, where we feel like we're boxed into a corner and we're forced by circumstances into a decision. And what happens in those cases is unconsciously, we just become a negatively coiled spring.
Hmm.
We're just waiting for we want out of that relationship or we want to get even.
Hmm.
And we don't do this because we're bad people. It's just human nature. Right. And so when the time comes, then we jump out of that relationship or we get our revenge or we're happy the other person fails. I don't want to be in relationships like that. So I try to make all of my relationships win-win. And when it comes to sort of building them, it's, well, if I can help people now, I can also, there's this interesting law of reciprocation. It's sort of the number one way to get people on your side is to do something nice for them, to go positive and go first, right?
Mm.
Don't wait for other people to go positive and go first. You can go positive and go first. And what happens when you do that is you build up reciprocation in other people. They want to help you. And so if I see opportunities to help people well in advance of any idea that we might have a future relationship, well in advance of anything, I want to do that. And so I often look to build relationships years, maybe even decades in advance of ever needing or wanting somebody or something from that relationship.
It's a very interesting way to see relationships. And I wonder, do you or have you had times where you were in a win-win relationships and when do you know it's not a win-win anymore? And conversely, have you started a relationship maybe on the wrong foot? And sometimes you're like, actually, we can build trust. We can align. Maybe there was a misunderstanding.
Yeah. So to both of those questions, I mean, you feel it in your body. Like I like to think I'm a very rational person. But part of rationality is how your body feels. Your body often has an intuition about relationships. It's not always right.
Mm.
That's the whole point about intuition is you need to double check it with your head. You need to think, we're animals, so we have intuition. All animals have an intuitive response. The difference between humans and most other animals is that we can override that intuitive response with our brain and we can think. We have like a little clutch in our car that we can sort of like pause for a second. Is this true? Is it not true? I'm feeling this. I don't need to react. I don't need to respond. And if we respond without reasoning, we're just like the animals that we are. And that's human nature. And so I think we often, or I often get a feeling about a relationship, right? And it doesn't have to be, I would say, win-win every particular moment.
Right.
But when you wake up and you feel like, hey, it's been weeks of this. Like, I don't feel good about this relationship. I don't feel good about my interactions with this person. I really don't want to go to work. I don't want to work for this boss anymore. Like, I don't want to deal with this customer anymore. And then the relationship isn't win-win. And I think that is a key sign for that. But you also know if somebody's trying to take advantage of you. I mean, you feel, because you can often put yourself in the circumstances of the other person. And if, they've got you backed into a corner and they're extracting a pound of flesh from you, well, that's not win-win. It might be the relationship that you need in this moment, but it's not going to last. It can't last because there's no trust.
Yeah.
And if there's no trust, you can't go fast, you can't go far, and you can't go over a long distance of time. And so if you think about the relationships you want to cultivate in life, you want all of those things, right? Some of the best relationships that I've been dealing with people for decades almost, right? For business, we've been dealing with certain investors that we have or investments that we've made. And, I barely have to look over legal paperwork.
Yeah.
Right? Because why? It's been 10 years. We've never had a problem. We solve them when we do have them. Everybody's looking out for everybody else. Nobody's trying to take the last dime on the table. And those type of relationships, we can move really fast. We've moved in 24 hours. We've written big checks for investments because we have these established relationships. And very few people can do that.
It's very true. And that's the started point of the discussion we had pre-recording was the conception of selling and sales, because what most people think about, sales, and this is what we do at Jab, is, the pushy person who wants to sell something. And just like you said, maybe you will be able to sell once with this kind of technique and have a big paycheck. But the whole point of what we're trying to do here at Jab and why your work is so inspiring to us is how do you build relationship with clients you want to keep your whole life? And I tend to see this relationship as a bud at the beginning, and then you water it, and it's very sometimes misleading when people think about sales. They think just transactional relationship, back to your first point, because there is a transaction. But it's so much more than this, because sometimes you have to navigate through conversations on money, investing. Sometimes people are in a situation where they have to pause the payment, and this kind of trust. And how are we still aligned? Maybe after a while, your clients, maybe they start doubting, they're going through a tough patch, and it's your role to still be there and realign and keep on building this trust. So I think your approach brings a very interesting light on how do you build relationship, especially in business, and relationships that stand the test of time is very interesting.
Well, think of transactions, right? Like, let's consider two different types of transactions. One, I sell you something, and it's a transaction for both of us.
Yes.
Well, now the next time I want to sell you something, I have to reestablish everything that I had to establish to make that first transaction happen. I have to repeat. And if we think of transactions another way, which is I'm an employee working in a company, and I feel like it's a job. That's a transaction, right? And my boss treats me like it's a job. Well, my boss isn't going to give me the opportunities that other people have if it's not a transaction for them, if it's a career for them, if they're all in and they're invested.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm not going to get the same opportunities other people get because I see it as a transaction. And my boss recognizes, feels that I see it as a transaction, not win-win anymore. So I'm going to opt out. I'm going to get fewer opportunities. I'm going to get fewer advancements. I'm going to get fewer of what I want. And I don't know why I'm getting it because I'm working hard while I'm there, but it's a transaction. And that feeling, like if you're a boss of somebody and you feel like it's a job for them and 9 to 5, they do exactly what they're told, but no extra. Well, I'm not going to go all in with you. I'm not going to invest with you. I'm not going to put my career on the line for you. And so you think about, well, how do I get this person on my side? How do I get this customer on my side? How do I get my boss on my side? How do I get everybody working for me? How do I get this big tailwind in life?
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that you establish that is you do win-win relationships. And the best way to establish that is go positive and go first.
Good food for thought. You talked about your company, and so I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into your personal entrepreneurial story. Can you tell us about Farnam Street and how did you build it and where do you want to take it?
Well, Farnham Street started when I was still working for the intelligence agency. I really just wanted to learn how people made decisions and how I could make better decisions. And so I started a website, which is now fs.blog, but back at the time it was 68131 -1440.blogger.com, which is not the current address. Somebody else has this, but the whole point of that
Did
was like
somebody else buy it?
no, it was like
Who wants this domain?
68131 is like the zip code for Berkshire Hathaway. 1440 is the unit number. And the whole point of this is it was like this series of digits. It was never meant for anybody to read but me. It was sort of like an online journal.
I like that.
Where I was just keeping track of like what I was learning and reflecting on it, right? And so I think the process for learning requires reflection. So we have an experience. That experience can be this conversation. That experience can be I'm reading a book. That experience can be like a physical experience in the world. But how do we codify that experience? And how do we condense it into something that we can use? And so we take all of this input, this available information, like this conversation, you know, we're recording in high definition cameras. But what we do as people, we're still recording this, but we're eliminating all these details, right? That detail is you know, not relevant. That detail we don't need that one. So we're condensing this experience into something that we can take away from it. And so I think of learning as the process of you have an experience, you reflect, you condense, right? A reflection, the act of reflection is condensing that experience into an abstraction or, you know, a sentence or something. I will do this differently next time. And that leads to an action. So you have a loop of learning. And so the whole point of the website that I had created was my active reflection, my condensing of, you know, the original papers by Kahneman and everything like that into something that I could take away and I could use. It just so happened that I had a very unique writing style because my background was computer science. And so I had never done any writing really. And so it was very, or to me, it was very logical. And the way that the thought process worked was organized almost like a computer program. And that attracted a certain group of people naturally. And that's how Farnam Street started. And it didn't start, you know, I think it started back in 2009, really. And then it didn't sort of become a business, I would say, until 2015, 2016. In the sense of we had a big enough audience that we could do that. And now we're super lucky. I mean, fast forward to today and we have almost 600,000 people on our newsletter and we get millions of visitors a month to our website. And we're able to do a lot of good with that, I think.
I can confirm. Fun fact, and you probably don't know this, but I decided to join the Jabba Adventure after going through your decision-making course. Yeah, it's been life-changing for me. So,
what did you think of it? What could we do better?
Oh, I loved it. It was back in 2019 now. It was pre-COVID.
Decision by design, right?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And I still use it to this day when some of my friends are making big life decisions. Where should I move? Or, you know, I sometimes tell them one or two drills that I went through, like, you know, especially the ones I remember that really stuck with me when you're facing a decision. I think the first one that I still apply to myself till this day is you know the way you do the hierarchy between the things you value, and sometimes you just think of doing, okay, I'm gonna make a list and go from 1 till 10. But what I thought was very smart in the way you presented it is kind of, I see it almost as a tennis kind of table, you know, and your values compete with one another, and then you get a proper ranking.
Yeah.
And so I ended up with valuing some things that I never thought I would put this number one in my intuition, for instance. We're talking about it. And so that's why, you know, when you were talking about intuition and brain and checking, sometimes I think it's so hard to know, because sometimes I should have trusted my intuition and sometimes I should have trusted my brain. But anyway, and so, for instance, my number one was I want to laugh every day.
Right.
I want to be creative. I want to do business, you know, like be kind of a businesswoman. And I had some other ones. But I ended up with being laughing every day being the number one. And I would never have suspected this. I would have probably said it made my top 3. But yeah, and I thought, oh, wow. And what does it mean? You know, it means being with colleagues that I feel comfortable with. And behind that, there's also colleagues I respect and value. But what this value said was more, who do I want to be surrounded with? More than what do I want to do?
Right.
And that's what I based my decision on. And I don't regret it. So, but yeah.
No, it forces you to sort of think about your values in a different way, and it forces you to make the invisible visible.
Absolutely.
Right. So much of decision making is taking our invisible thought process, our invisible feelings, our invisible intuition, and making it visible, because once it's visible, then we get a check and balance on it.
Oh, I love that. And I also think another one that I liked was if you were forced to, so you have 2 options, you know, for instance, stay at your job or quit, and because you had another side project that you want to launch, and then you're forced to stay at your job, how would you work on this side project? Or you were forced to quit tomorrow, how would you launch your new job? This one also made a lot of sense to me. And as you said, I think it's very true. It's what I learned in this course is how do you make visible things that you didn't even know were there, or maybe you saw in another way, and it's very cool. So,
oh, thank you.
No, it's amazing. So I forgot my other question, but we were in the middle of talking about Farnham Street, and as a founder myself, I also wonder, one of the things that strike me with your brand, and I'm curious to have your perspective on this, is how do you articulate your own personal brand? Because the podcast is you, and I think there's a strong Shane Parrish brand, but at the same time, you're also developing the Knowledge Project as a brand in Farnam Street. How do you think about this?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't like the spotlight, which is why it's not
I
Shane
had
Parrish.
this intuition.
Yeah, so this is why it's not ShaneParrish.com or the Shane Parrish Show or anything like that. I don't like that type of attention, and I always want the focus to be on the material, the guest on the podcast or the material on the website. And I'm not coming up with original ideas. I mean, the tagline for the website and the podcast, if you will, is sort of mastering the best of what other people have already figured out. So if I do anything, it's basically to share that information with you and maybe connect the dots in a unique way. But it's not about me. It's about the guest. It's about the knowledge. It's about the sharing. And, maybe we create something that lasts 100 years and well beyond me, and maybe we don't. But there's no shot of that if it's ShaneParrish.com. And I think there's so much good that we can do through Farnam Street that I have plans for in sort of like 20 years. And I just don't I don't want my name on it, right? Like I want to do, I have this idea of a perpetual scholarship that we can set up where we basically make university free for everybody in the world, but it takes like 200 years to happen.
Yeah, especially with the tuition fees.
Right. So, but the idea is like maybe we can endow or, create a bursary, but part of that bursary is you kick back 2% of your income for the rest of your life. And then how many people do we need for that to steamroll, to compound over a long period of time? And so like there's all these things that I want to do, but I just don't really, and I think they're good for the world.
Yeah.
Or at least my interpretation is they're good for the world, but I don't want I don't want my name on that. I want it to be an idea that just sort of like stands alone. And Farnam Street, the name comes as an homage to Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who I've learned so much from.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm just standing on the shoulder of giants and seeing, maybe the world in a little bit different way than they do. But I recognize my place in that is not coming up with anything unique or individual.
It's very wise because I think when you're in the spotlight and you start to get a following, it can be very easy to feel a sense of ego coming up and a temptation to be also, wow, there is so much I could say, and maybe it's still you in the podcast, and I think people have an attachment to you as Shane, and not just the Farnam Street brand. So I think it's very it demands some sort of courage to be, no, I should check myself, step back. Well, even though you said you don't like the spotlight, but still, I imagine sometimes there is a tension between Shane Parrish and the Farnham Street brand.
Well, there is in a way, right? Because I feel like we'd grow faster if
Yeah,
it was Shane Parrish,
exactly.
because it's easier to trust a person
Absolutely.
than it is to trust a brand.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we made it about me, there's the advantage to that would be that we would probably grow faster.
Mm.
The flip side of that is like, why do I want to grow faster? Right? If I'm anticipating, that I'm going to do this for 20 or 30 years and I'm just having fun, like I don't even consider this work. I really have the best job, if you want to call it that, in the world. I get to talk to the most interesting people. I get the most interesting experiences. I get serendipity like this, right? So I just want to keep doing that. Why do I need it to go
Yeah.
faster? And so I have a line that I use with my kids, which is a lack of patience changes the outcome.
Mm.
And I feel like when we often start making these subtle trade-offs, we want to grow faster than natural. We want to do something just a little, like we do this all the time. If you look at most problems in the world, they arise from an unforced error.
What
Most
do
of
you
our
mean?
mistakes, right? So we're trying to make something happen that we know how to make happen. We're just trying to make it happen quicker. You can think of the gyms aren't a big thing in Europe, but in North America, you try to get in shape, but you try to get in shape like tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you go to the gym, you like kill yourself, and now you're injured.
Yeah.
You want to get rich. You want a nest egg for retirement. Well, we know the path to make that happen is pretty established. Spend less than you make, save the difference, invest it, wait a long period of time, and you can almost guarantee you're going to have enough money. But we don't want to do that. We want to get rich tomorrow, right? So a lack of patience changes the outcome that we're going to achieve. And I think that so many problems come from that. And why do I need to grow faster? We're growing at a great pace. What would a little faster do for my life? Would it make it better? No, not at all. And then the other side of this is if we made it Shane Parrish and not Farnam Street, like who wants to work for a company like that, right? Like I wouldn't want to work
point.
I wouldn't want to work for a company. Like I try to be the employer, if you will, that I would want to work for. And there's pros and cons to that, but like I wouldn't want to work for somebody who sort of like had their name on everything and this big sort of big head and everything was about them and they're the star. And some people do, and that's fair, but I don't personally. I want to work for a company where we're building something together and we're doing it long term. And the way that I would feel that we're building something together is that I feel a part of something larger than myself. And that part of something larger than myself can't be Shane Parrish, right? And plus, all of this, like Dieter Berman, who played the Shane Parrish character in Australia, I mean, he's still the most popular Shane Parrish in the world.
How come you don't have a Wikipedia page?
I have no idea.
I feel like I should start it for you. It's a very good point, especially in the age of social media and LinkedIn. Even some founders whose company don't have their name, sometimes I feel it's still all about them. And this pace of thing, you're right. It's also, I feel, dictated by, social media, as I've said, where there's this competition to be the biggest, the fastest, I grow like crazy. And also the structure of how companies are funded, and you have investors who want, quick returns. And at Jab, we're self-funded, and so we're trying to build something quite similar, I think, to what you're building, which is different. And sometimes when you're in contradiction with your whole environment, in the ecosystem and the trends of, going fast, and this is the hacks, when really you're about the fundamentals and being solid. It can be difficult as a founder and in your mental journey, because you're questioning. You're right. Sometimes you're very certain, like, I know I'm playing the long game, but sometimes there is a little doubt, because if you're looking on the side, or if you're thinking, or your employees tell you, like, at this company they do this, or why don't we do this, big campaign or whatever, you're starting to have self-doubt. So you need to be really anchored in why you're doing this.
There's always somebody getting rich faster than you. There's always somebody growing faster than you. There's always somebody, but that's okay, right? I think that's just fine.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
The point you made resonates with one of your big concepts that I want to talk about, which is positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to dig a little bit deeper for our French audience who might not be familiar with this concept of how do you position yourself in the future? Why is this concept important? And maybe what is it first?
Well, positioning is sort of being, how do I explain this the best way? Positioning is never being forced to do something you don't want to do, and always having optionality. And so much of how we approach life is predicting. We're predicting what the future is going to be. We're trying to determine what the future is going to look like, and we position ourselves for that one particular future. But if you think of the future, there's infinite possible futures. And the question is, again, goes back to this concept ties to a lack of patience, changes the outcome. If you believe that you are going to live until 80, 100, you have a long, long life ahead of us. And I don't need to win any particular moment. I just need to stick around at the end, right? And so the way that I think of this is I always try to put myself in a position where I'm never forced by circumstances to do something I don't want to do. So the best aid to judgment, business judgment, even personal judgment, is never being forced to do something you don't want to do. And how do we do that? Well, if we start applying that to our life, I don't want to get laid off. I want to develop skills in advance of needing them that I'm likely to need in the future, no matter what I do. Well, I can do that today. I don't need to wait for anybody to tell me to do that. I don't need to wait to get laid off to develop those skills. I can do that today. What does that do? It positions me to be in a better circumstance if the world changes. I think of mortgages, right? Well, we've just had a 22-year period of probably the lowest mortgage rates that we will ever see, the lowest mortgage rates effectively in history. We even had negative rates in Europe. That's never happened before. So a lot of people put themselves in a position where that's going to continue. So they predicted, without actually making a prediction about the future, they predicted what the future is going to look like, and they went all in on the biggest house they could afford, and now what's happening, at least in Canada, because mortgages renew every 5 years in Canada. I don't know what they do in Europe.
Oh, they never renew, so you have fixed rates forever.
Oh, well, that's
it's crazy
beautiful.
For 25 years. Yeah, it's pretty beautiful.
So in Canada, effectively, it's 3 to 7 years. Almost all mortgages
will
renew.
Australia. Yeah.
And so what happens now, what we're seeing is that people who went all in and consumed all of their disposable income on housing can't afford their housing. And that's a really sad situation. But it's also, in the concept of this conversation, you predicted the world was going to look like that forever. And it didn't. So how do you position yourself? Well, you don't buy the biggest house you can. You save for a rainy day. It's all of these things that, our grandparents used to tell us. And it's sort of like common sense, but we somehow fail in the moment to think about it. And you think of like Warren Buffett, who's sort of like one of my heroes, if you will. He's got $120 billion on his balance sheet in cash. And why does he have that? Because he's positioned for, it doesn't matter if the world supercharges growth and we have 20 years of prosperity, or we have a recession, or he's positioned to take advantage no matter what the situation is. And I try to think of life in terms of positioning.
Mm.
which is how do I position myself to never be forced by circumstances into selling my house, doing something I don't want to do, margin, being forced to sell an investment because I borrowed money for that investment. I want to be able to weather the storm.
Mm.
And I don't want anybody else. I don't want to rely on the kindness of strangers to make that happen.
What I struggle with sometimes is how to balance, just generally speaking, timeless wisdom sometimes in positioning takes you to make an effort to step back from your own life. And sometimes I feel like I'm in such a rush. Like yesterday, I couldn't believe, wow, it's Bastille Day already. Hang on, 2023? What am I doing? I'm wondering, how do you personally balance this? I'm sorry. I'm in the rush. I'm running a company. Everything needs to happen yesterday. Oh, well, that's how sometimes founders can feel. And this idea of, hang on, let's take a step back and see which interesting concepts can apply and put myself in the long game and put things into perspective. Do you ever struggle with this? Because you also feel like you're pretty, by nature, you're more calm and kind of have perspective. So maybe my question for you is, do you sometimes find yourself in the mood where you're like, oh my God, I'm in a rush and I don't have time to step back?
Sometimes. I mean, I don't think of it as balance. I think of it as integrated.
Oh, okay. Tell me the difference.
Well, balance implies that I need to take a little bit, and I always need to be in sort of balance. And I think a better way for me to resonate with this is a mosaic, where we have all these different pieces that need to fit into life, but they all don't need to look the same, and they definitely don't need to look the same over time. And so I think of that as like, well, the kids, that's a foundational piece for me. And that piece is very large and it shrinks a little bit as they grow up, right? My kids will always be super important to me, but their time with me changes. I see that now, they're 12 and sort of 13. And I see, the time with me is changing.
Right.
And so that's going to become a smaller part in some ways. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be there for them. Doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean anything. It just means they want their independence a little bit more than they did when they're 5 or 6, right? When they're totally dependent on me.
Yeah.
And so that time commitment changes. And what are the other parts that we put in our lives to make what we consider a meaningful life? Well, there's community, there's sort of health, there's relationships, there's work, all of these things, but they're all different sizes at different points in time. And if they're the same size at 60 as they were at 20,
something's wrong.
Something's wrong. Exactly.
Yeah.
So why can't that change more frequently? Like, why can't, and this is what I tell my kids, and I'm like, I have a book coming out October 3rd. And so I'm like, it's going to be busy, right? Like September is going to be really busy, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Because we go through these phases where work is really busy, and then we step back and I build in sort of like almost like an athlete, right? Where
I like that.
I build in sort of like, okay, well, September's, October, November, those are going to be 3 crazy months. So December, January, February, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to take less speaking or fewer speaking engagements. I'm going to record fewer podcasts. I'm going to do less work so that I can recharge, so that I can go for the next sort of sprint, right? I need to recover too. And I'm perfectly capable of sprinting for years. And this is the byproduct of knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not the happiest person when I do it, but I can do it. And I can I feel in myself, I can weather any storm. Like I can just grin, bear it, crawl across glass every day, go to bed, do it again. I don't like it, but I can do it. But I don't want to do that. And so if I can build these little rest areas into what I'm doing, it prepares me for when things change. COVID.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody saw it coming. It happened. It was, for me, it was like 2 years of, in some ways, the best years of my life, and in some ways the worst years of my life. I mean, from a challenging stress point of view, it was probably the worst it's ever been. for me personally, from like business, from family, from everything going on, from developing a relationship with the kids and spending
Yeah.
more time with them and taking care of them. It was great. And so like you have these two parts that can both be true, but I don't want to be in a position where I'm caught exhausted going into something like that. I don't know what the future holds. I want to position myself to be able to withstand whatever the future holds.
It really resonates with me because I don't have children yet, and I'm wondering whether I want to have kids or not. And one of my friends told me that sometimes I don't know if you have this in Canada, but in France, if you're Christian, I'm not sure about. Well, if you're Catholic, for sure, you have a priest that helps you prepare. So it's called like a marriage preparation. And you have sessions with them, and they ask you question, what do you want to get married, and then tell you it's stuff sometimes, this kind of stuff. And the priest asked my friend a question. He told him, imagine your life is a pie. And so they were talking about family and starting a family. And your life's a pie divided into how many parts you want. So you have, like you just said, friends, work, like health, whatever. And when you have children, your pie is going to change, and they're going to eat the pie in some way. Now, how are your children or your family life is going to eat the pie? And my friend told me that he realized that he had such a different perspective from his future wife, because for him, he's like, all right, well, the children are going to eat this slice of the pie, like social life. So I will just have no more social life. And then his wife was like, no, my children, they're going to eat like a little bite of each slice. And I thought and so that's what made me reflect on this concept of, balance. There's also, I think, some pressure today on being very balanced, but everyone's still struggling with it, and there's more
Right.
burnout than any time. And so I'm just like,
Well, that's interesting, right? Like in some ways, burnout is a luxury.
Ooh, interesting.
And that's a very controversial view, but as a single parent, I don't get the luxury of being burnt out.
Very interesting.
It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, going through COVID, I mean, if I start telling myself the story that I'm burnt out, then what?
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
And if I start acting like I'm burnt out, because I'm telling the most important story in the world is the one we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
So if I start telling myself I'm burnt out, now what? I don't want to get out of bed. Well, I don't have a choice. Doctors, surgeons, they can't get burnt out. I mean, they get burnt out as much as other people. Firemen, police officers. I mean, a lot of it becomes a luxury. And I say that with all respect for how people are feeling.
For sure.
I think for me personally, if the story I'm telling myself is that I'm burnt out, I'm going to start acting like I'm burnt out. If I start acting like I'm burnt out, my kids are going to suffer. My parents are going to suffer. Everybody's going to suffer. Going back to kids, though, for 1 second, one thing I learned my parents live a few blocks away from us. And so...
You're very lucky.
Totally lucky.
It's cool, yeah.
And originally when they moved, they were 3 hours away, and they moved close to us, close to the three of us, about 2017. And originally I thought, oh, this is going to be so good for me. Right? And going back to the pie concept, I don't know if I resonate with the pie concept because I like things to grow. I don't like to fix it.
It was the priest concept.
But I was like, oh, I got a babysitter. This is going to be great. And, and I really underappreciated how amazing it was for my parents.
Yeah.
And going through the last 7 years of having them close in COVID, it sort of gave them a lot of purpose and a lot of meaning. And it actually changed how I think. I'd love to have more kids. Like it changed how I think about kids, because I'm like, wow, what an impact this had on, my 65-year-old parents.
Yeah.
Where it gave them, during COVID, it gave them purpose. It gave them meaning, gave them something to look forward to. And I think it's probably safe to say this now, but like we violated all the rules during COVID. Like my parents were over.
That's fine. So did I.
Yeah, my parents were over all the time. We ran like a homeschool in my house.
That's cool.
Well, in Canada, this was completely illegal, as
I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, I think the data reveals now that those laws were a bit weird. Um, but yeah, but it gave them all of these things to look forward to
Mm.
at a time when there was nothing, there was no hope, there was no
Yeah.
sort of, and I think that it in so many ways saved them. And I'm like, wow, I want that when I'm older,
Yeah.
right? Like I want to look at like 30 grandchildren and like, yeah, this is so we often think about kids and we think about our current life, which is the pie, and this is where I'm coming back with this. And we don't think about, well, like fast forward to 90,
Yeah.
right? What do I want my life to look like when I'm 90? Like I still want to have huge family gatherings and like hear screaming kids and
Yeah.
busy household full of people and big dinners with family and friends. And so if we worked backwards from that, then we know that kids are an important element of that.
Mm.
And so often what I have personally seen, and I don't, everybody has their own choices and their own feelings, is that people, it's about 55 to 60 where people regret not having kids. And then I wouldn't say it's too late. It's too late to biologically probably have kids. It's not too late to adopt at that point.
Right.
But I feel like that's the moment where life becomes, the pie changes, right? Like
Mm.
work goes away. Your spouse and you have done a lot of traveling. You've done all of these things that you want to, and it's like, now what?
Yeah.
And I think kids actually sort of like add a very important element to the now what
Mm.
part of life.
Well, it's so interesting. It really resonates because that's, it's when I think about it, I see the pie right now because. Alex loves to do like cricket. It takes a lot of time. We are very independent. Like, I like this independence. But I also, so in my family, my grandmother's 96. And till
Mm.
this day, my mom still goes and has breakfast with her every morning.
Mhm.
And I grew up in this family where we were a tribe, and it's so nice. And our
Mhm.
door was always open for our friends. And part of me is like, yeah, I want that too. And so, as you said, it comes back to positioning yourself. It's like, I gotta
Yeah.
act now because, and not focus on what I think I'm losing now because you don't know what you're getting until.
Well, this is it, right? You're focused on loss aversion, right?
Exactly.
Which is, I'm going to lose my independence. I'm going to lose my.
Yeah.
It's not all going to be about me anymore. Now it's going to be about other people in a
Yeah.
way that it's never been before, and
Right.
I can see why that would be totally scary.
Well, anyway, thank you for this very interesting answer. So, what I wanted to ask you is you've started, Farnham Street in 2009, but you've had so many amazing guests on your podcast. And when I listen to your conversations, I wonder, is there something that profound that you've changed your view on since you started your podcast? Because I think one of the points of all those conversations is to learn and maybe sometimes get contradicting views with what you might have thought. Or I wonder, how does the podcast, or has it changed you on a deeper level?
Yeah, it's made me a lot more curious about other people. The combination of kids and the podcast has made me more curious about seeing the world through other people's eyes. And it doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but it's definitely allowed me in conversation to, like, my opinion is like, I don't need to express my opinion. I don't need to disagree with you, but I want to see the world through your eyes. And I think the podcast has really, at a fundamental level, changed how I ask questions. And it's also, I get people on there that have contradicting views about things too. Like,
Yeah,
there's
I like that a lot, actually.
there's two podcasts on relationships. I think one's in the 60s and one's in the 70s, with Sue Johnson and Esther Perel. And they have a very different view of relationships and intimacy. And for me, the best thing about the podcast is I can call up most people in the world and get them on the show.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. I'm curious. Like, I'm actually curious to talk to you. You're not filling a block. Like, I'm just super curious. I'm trying to navigate this world of relationships and sex and marriage. And divorce, and what does it all mean, and how do I make sense of it in my head?
Mm.
And I think having these contradicting views, I don't pick left or right. I'm sort of like, this sort of makes sense to me, and this sort of makes sense to me. And how do I integrate these things into my personal view of the world? But when I'm talking to them, I just want to know what they think, why they think that, where that came from. How did you come up with it? Let me see the world through your eyes. Because if I see the world through your eyes, I'm going to understand why you think the way you do. And if we see somebody doing something that doesn't make sense to us, it doesn't mean that person, nobody is doing something that's irrational to them.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what it really means is that they see the world, and this is an opportunity, right? You see your coworker, your partner, they're doing something, and you're like, "That's stupid. That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense."
Mhm.
Well, what's really happening is that they're seeing the world in a different way than you are, and that's where sort of there's an opportunity, an invitation, if you will,
Mm.
to try to discover the not in an argumentative way, but in a totally curiosity. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
How is it that you're seeing the world where this is the path? I want to see the world through your eyes, because if I see it through your eyes, I'm going to understand why you're doing the thing that you're doing.
I think it's such an interesting standpoint, as opposed to we're so quick to being judgmental and be like, well, he's doing this wrong, obviously.
Yeah.
And so approaching it almost like a child, who's always asking, but why? Like sometimes can also help you build more complexity into like what you see of the world.
Well, so much of the message that we're taking in about the world is black and white, right? And
I know.
it's designed to not be curiosity based. It's designed to instigate or ignite a
Yeah.
feeling in us. And so much of people's opinions, and we all have them. I have them. You have them. But when we drill down into them, it's like, where did that opinion came from? I read a headline in a newspaper like 10 years ago, and like it just stuck
Yeah.
with me, and that became my opinion. I have no basis for it. I can't even
Absolutely.
argue for it. And so I've started this thing, which is like the work required to have an opinion. And so it's like, can I argue the other side of my opinion better than you can
Yeah.
if you're arguing against me? And if I can't, then I probably don't have a strongly held opinion on this.
Welcome to my life. It's hard to be married to a lawyer.
I was just going to say,
Devil's advocate. But even though I recognize it's a good practice, sometimes I want to be entitled to my opinions, even if they have no foundation. Let me vent for a second. But it still is a good point. Sometimes I call Alex Jean-Michel Sceptique, like Mr. Skeptical, because
yeah.
there is really this tendency sometimes to always be black, white. I feel like we live in an era where you have to choose your side on a lot of things.
Well,
you can't really stand in the middle and be like, well, there's truth to both. Like, let's talk about it.
Well, that try doing that at a dinner party or something,
I know,
right? And
I
be
know.
like, well, that's sort of true. It could be true, but it's not necessarily. Oh my God, you'd be like, nobody would want to talk to you.
Exactly. Or sometimes people just label you for one part of the sentence you said. Oh, so you're okay, you're this.
Yeah.
And no, I just said maybe there is a truth to this and that. And so, yeah, it's...
Well, people want validation of their opinions.
That too,
right?
yeah.
So they don't even want you to understand them mostly. They want you to validate them, that they're right. I just opt out of all of this stuff. I read the business news and not the news. And there's a huge difference between the two, because anything big in the world makes its way into business news. And business news tends to be a lot less inciting of emotion or feeling. And if there's something large going on in the world, it almost always appears in the business news eventually. And the bigger it is, the quicker it sort of appears in business news, like COVID, appeared very quickly in business news. But you miss all of these other things that, like, I don't want to read about this stuff because I don't want to, think about this for a second, right? And going back to learning.
Yeah.
Let's tie this back to learning. So if learning comes from experience and reflection, and then you condense that into a compression, which is the abstraction, how do we consume information, and how is that relevant to us learning? So most of the time we're consuming information from a journalist or somebody online who writes 50 to 70 articles a year about 50 to 70 different subjects a year. So it's like, wait, how can they be an expert on all of this? Well, they can't be an expert on all of this stuff. So wait, am I getting, if the source of learning comes from experience, then if I want to learn, I'm going to have higher quality learning experience if I talk to somebody who's got firsthand experience.
Right.
And why is that relevant? It's because I'm getting the data, the uncompressed data. So the person who had the original experience, a book is an example. It's like uncompressed. There's a lot of stories in there, a lot of data, there's a lot of nuances, and it's still a compression, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it's got a lot more facts and nuance, and that's how our brain is meant to actually work. And we see it as redundant, right? Because today we just want the gist of things.
Right.
Okay, I got the point, right?
Yeah.
You told me the sentence.
Yeah.
I don't need the data. I don't need anything else. But our brains actually work differently than that, right? So what we're consuming is the compression, somebody else's abstraction of knowledge. And the way that this becomes relevant is, think about if you're a chef and I'm a line cook, or I'm an at-home cook. You're a chef, I'm an at-home cook.
I'm the chef.
So we both take the recipe and we make it. And if everything goes well, you can't tell the difference.
But
if things don't go well, the chef instantly knows what went wrong. Too much salt, too high heat, baked too long, your oven's off, right? The chef knows just by taste, feel. Why? Because they've had the experience. They've done it 1,000 times. They've taken all of that experience, they've compressed it into knowledge.
Wow, I love this
But the recipe they shared is the compression of that knowledge. It's the expression of it, the abstraction of it. Think of it as however you want. So I can take that recipe and I can use it. But I don't know, when things don't go right, I don't know why. So I don't know when it's useful and when it's not. I don't know what wine pairing to have with it. I don't know the context around it, but I have this knowledge. And so much of what we consume is recipes.
Right.
And then we think we have knowledge because it sounds good, it looks good. And if things go right, it kind of gets us the results we want. And then we sort of get this confidence from it. But at the end of the day, if it goes left 1 degree or right 1 degree, or the temperature is just slightly off or something goes wrong, we have no idea why it went wrong, what went wrong, how it went wrong. So we just blame somebody else. It's not my fault. I followed the recipe.
I love this because I think in a world where everything is kind of prêt à penser, like ready to think, like prêt à manger, and just what is left of, and everything seems to be the same with globalization. I'm walking in Paris, I see the same shops as when I'm in New York, and I'm just like, what is the taste of life at the end if I can get anything everywhere and everyone's reading the same, and I think this example just really shows the value of your internal life. And as you said, it's something that's very underrated today. And the stories you tell yourself, it's also very, you had Naval Ravikant on the podcast, and when I listen to him, the thing that strikes me the most is happiness is a decision. Every day you can choose, and we don't hold enough value on this inner work, and the beauty it can have of like, well, of course I have lots of recipes, but what do I make of them? And do I want to practice this recipe time and times over again? And what if I made it my own and I changed this ingredient? And how do you take the resources and the world that's around you and you make it your own? I think is what I hear in this example too, which is very beautiful. And it's a beautiful way to, even if there is a lot of recipes today, how do you make it your own and you go deeper? And I think it's something that we don't encourage, especially students, to do more of, because we live in a world where there's going to be more of that. The attention span of people is reducing, and unfortunately, the mass trend is more to go along this trend and not to reverse it.
You have 7 seconds to get somebody's attention online, right?
Yeah, I know.
So that causes all the sort of bad behavior. I want to go back to happiness as a choice. The reason we don't want happiness to be a choice is because then it's on us.
Yeah.
We would much rather blame the government, blame our circumstances, blame anything. But
Yeah.
like in a way, we'd much rather be a victim.
Yeah.
When happiness is on somebody else, it enables that story we're telling
Yeah.
ourselves about who's at fault and why we're not happy, and it's somebody else's fault. And I think at the end of the day, when you come to the conclusion that happiness is a choice, then you start looking at your life and the choices you're making and the internal beliefs you have
Hmm.
and the environment that you're operating in, because so often environment determines behavior, behavior determines feelings. Then you start thinking, oh, what can I do? I
Yeah.
can't do everything. I can't change the government. I can't, but I can ignore that stuff because I don't, all the energy that we spend on stuff that we don't control comes at the expense of stuff we do control.
Yeah.
And we've sort of inverted this equation, right? We're spending very little time on the things we do control, and all of this energy, this brain power, this thoughts, these threads in the back of our head on things we don't control. You think of cocktail parties or dinner parties again. We spend so much time trying to talk about things that we have, like we don't have control over.
Right.
Like
It's so true.
it doesn't matter. Like your opinion can be X, mine can be Y, but at the end of the day, we can't do anything about it. So it doesn't even matter who's right or
Yeah.
wrong. Why can't we talk about things that we do control, things that we do have power over, including what we read, what we pay attention to,
Right.
who we hang out with, our environment, right? Our physical environment, our mental environment, the type of information that we consume. All of these things we have a lot more control over. And like, if you think about the information you consume, that becomes your future thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And people should pay more attention to that. Shane, I'm mindful of the time.
Oh,
I only have, unfortunately, 4 minutes left.
okay.
So, on my list of questions, there are so many I still want to discuss, but I have a few quick questions for you. Well, I hope quick. I mean, who knows? What do you do to get out of your head? Because, when you're thinking so much, sometimes you need to not think. What do you do?
Run, sauna,
Oh, sauna.
kids.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have a sauna at home?
I do, yeah.
That's my goal. Maybe one day we'll get one in the office. All right. That's actually a long question, but it will be my last question. What's the big question you're asking yourself at the moment?
The question I'm always asking myself, which is like, what does it mean to live a meaningful life, and what's my contribution to the world? So what can I do to make the world a better place? And it doesn't have to be a big change. It can just be a small little thing. And then what do I want? Right? I mean, I'm always asking myself, what do I want? And it changes. Right now, I mean, what I want is to spend all the time with my kids that they want to spend with me. And so everything else is secondary to that, because the moment, there'll be a point in time, and this comes to ego and trade-off and ambition. I'm a super ambitious person. I want to do a lot of things,
Yeah.
but I can do them later. There's no rush. Again, lack of patience changes the outcome. The most important thing right now is my relationship with my kids. And so I want to spend all the time with them. But these things, like we think of them once, like we all sort of like go through our 20s and we think about these things. And then we don't really rethink about that.
Yeah, it's so true.
But they change all the time. And like going back to the competing values, you can have competing wants, but you have to have a primary. There's got to be one thing that supersedes everything else. And it doesn't mean the other things aren't important. It just means when it comes down to choices and you're forced to pick, maybe between the pie or however you want to think of it, it becomes clear to you what choices you want to make. And I think for me, I just think about that stuff all the time. Like I usually have a once a year retreat with myself, if that makes sense. Like
It makes complete sense.
I go away for like a night or two, and it's just me and like a notebook, and I sort of write about the last year, reflect, right? Writing is reflecting about the things that I did that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And from an entrepreneur point of view, it's like, what part of this job do I not like? Can I hire somebody to do that?
Yeah.
So I want to do less of that next year and more of something that gave me energy. What is it that I did? Am I working towards these larger goals? Did I make the world a better place? And how do you know you made the world a better place? And I think, meeting people and having, the conversations that we're having and sort of the conversation we had before this, like
Yeah.
I feel it. I feel like we're doing something that's positive force for people, and we do it at scale. And I think that that's a really good thing to do. And I just want to make sure that I'm also happy. Like, I don't need to be happy every day. I'm happy most days. But if I, for a year or two in a row, I was like, I really don't want to do this anymore, then I don't think I have to do it. And I think that those are important check-ins with you. Like if you're on Sunday and you don't want to go to work on Monday, well, that's fine for a week.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling like that for months, like there's a problem and you need to solve it.
Yeah.
Because we only get one shot at this life. We only have, we don't get a do-over when we don't get any of that stuff. We can't undo the last 5 years of our life.
We're not cats. We don't have 9 lives.
Right. And so you have to make these choices consciously. And I feel like so often, again, it's making the invisible visible. And that's what I'm trying to do, right? So I'm trying to live consciously. And that might mean going left one year and right the next year. And it might mean I've made a mistake, and it might mean, this isn't important anymore. But the whole point is that I'm trying to think about it and consciously choose. And I would rather consciously choose and be wrong than not consciously choose and be wrong.
Wow, beautiful. I thank you for being so honest and open on this podcast. And thank you for, I think it's easy to not notice how intentional you are with your life. So it's inspiring. And now I will let you go to your kids because I don't want to distract you from this priority for too long. So thank you so much, Shane, for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And I will put in the show notes all the links of your blog and your podcast. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay in beautiful Paris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.